SDG number 8, decent work and economic growth. We're going to be talking about this. The main title of this panel is one of our lunchtime debates. My name is Chris Burns. If you don't know me, I had a hard talk show on Euronews. 3 people, 10 minutes, start a fight. We have 3, maybe 4, and we will have a civil discussion about unions fighting for the future, data, democracy, and dictatorship. We want to talk about platform businesses and how unions are organizing around that new development in the economy, the global economy, the work of the ILO Future of Work Commission, and union experiences of being censored for what is written on Facebook. That's on the top of the list. And I was looking for one of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. We got a pile of these. For those of you watching here virtually, hello, and please send any kind of questions and comments to hashtag ITUC18, and those of you out in the audience as well. So I tried to pick a box. I tried to pick one of the SDGs. We don't have all of them, but I believe that decent work and economic growth fits in that quite well, considering. All right. While we keep that in mind, let's go to our first panelist, and I'm going to go to the first one is going to be Phil Jennings. Yeah. Phil, you're there on the right. We are expecting a 4th person, hopefully, shortly. You are the ILO Future of Work. You are on the ILO Future of Work Commission. Yeah. You used to be the Secretary General of the Global Union. Mm-hmm. You are preparing a report. This Future of Work Commission is preparing a report that is going to be released in June,
January the 22nd.
In January, okay, yeah. All right, okay, I stand corrected. There's a lot of important reporting on that in Equal Times. That is the news arm of the ITUC. You can find that at equaltimes.org. There's a lot of reporting about that. Phil, the monopolistic power of the big 5, the Googzillas of the world, Apple, Alphabet, Microsoft, Facebook, Amazon. You know what? There's a report in Bloomberg that talks about how the big 5 could destroy the tech ecosystem. They could eat it. They're gobbling it up, and there will be nothing left. These tech platforms and companies they serve exist in an ecosystem where there must be some sort of balance. Profitable companies can allocate only so much of their revenue to advertising, cloud services, information tech. If their profits go away or are disrupted by these tech companies, which are gobbling them up, their ad and tech spending will go away. A few highly successful predators could decimate their ecosystem and wind up hungry. Sounds like dinosaurs, doesn't it?
Yes.
How much are you worried about that? And where do trade unions fit into this?
First of all, the ecosystem is the big 5. The ecosystem is made up of Facebook, Google, Amazon, Microsoft. And at the moment, they are doing their level best to ensure that there is no predatory activity that threatens their domination. In economic history, we've never seen a level of market domination to this extent. In the work of the Commission, we have had a look at this and raised the warning flags about what the broader implications of this mean for our economies, for the world of work, and also for our own civilization. 5 big companies in the next 10 years, if they remain untouched, will have access to something like 150 billion devices, all of whom will be in connection with one another. So we have 2 big issues here. The hands of this ecosystem are in the hands of 5 big companies, and their raw material, their product, touches 10 times the size of the world's population now, between 10 to 20 times the size of the population. Domination in ownership, domination in control of the data. So the warning signs are everywhere. This is real business, a real agenda for the trade union movement.
Exactly.
We cannot let this happen. We have to question this power. We have to change their authority. We have to marginalize them from the power that they have today, and at the same time get a rebirth of regulation over these actors and a rebirth of regulation over the data which they control, which they abuse, which they manipulate for the end of the day for private ends. These are private companies. These are companies quoted on the stock market. They are driven by shareholder values. They are not public utilities.
Okay, so that in mind, can you give us kind of a sneak peek or your hope of what you're going to see in that ILO report next month regarding this?
I think, first of all, when it comes to the degree of concentration, we are clearly going to see a reference to the need for regulators to have a look at this, I believe. This I think, will be a part of it. There's one way of beginning the fight back for control of the data, and that is data protection and worker data protection and the scope of collective agreements that we can capture not just the data, its privacy, but also to have some social control over it. And it is clear that the ILO, I think, will be asked to begin a development of a convention or a recommendation with respect to data protection. The ILO will be looking at what makes for sustainable jobs and where the jobs will be. The ILO will also be looking at what quality jobs are and what will it mean to build a system where not any old job will do, but what does sustainable employment look like? And above all, make a very strong call that we have to reinvest in the demographic governance of our workplaces. And what we have with the Big Five, with 150 billion connected devices, is a new form of control, and therefore it turns labor into a commodity. When you look at those Uber and Lyft and others and Airbnb, they look at their people as a commodity. Labor is being commodified. How do you take away the commodification of labor? You have to begin a new conversation about demographic governance and about labor market institutions. That means the right to organize and the right to collectively bargain.
There's only so far that governments can go to regulate and international institutions. It's a question of power relationships, isn't it?
I think,
and that's what this week is all about here.
Yeah, well, we're not going to change the behavior without changing the rules. And there's no pussyfooting about here. The regulators that have had an eye on the structure of competition, on the domination of big business, have been looking at it with one eye. They're looking at it through the perspective of, well, if it's okay for the consumer, if the consumer gets it for free, if the consumer gets a cheaper price, then we're okay. We can tolerate this degree of domination and ownership. We have to go back to a century ago, to the first Gilded Age, where monopoly was seen as a danger to democracy. It was seen as a danger to the economy. It stifled competition, and they built rules. Yeah. And they built rules in place to ensure that there wasn't the domination of one organization over production lines, over services and trade. So when you say, limits, the governments have to take a stand. Okay. We're beginning to see it. I hope that the new House of Representatives in D.C., we have a number of congressmen and women who are eager to begin a conversation about, with the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, about regulation. Yeah. Because we see at the end of the day, this is not about pricing a product. It's about our democracies. That when the Big Five controlling all the big data and then sell it on without our knowledge, and then they know how to manipulate the software, to manipulate emotion, to manipulate reaction. This becomes a danger to our democracies and begins to question the way that we have done things until now, questions pluralism and everything else. So therefore, I think it's a time for the regulators to stand up, to get their regulatory mojo back and get down to the task, because this is big.
Okay, let's look at a specific case with Edward Mapong. Yeah. You are General Secretary of the KSBS of Indonesia, the trade union federation there. You are dealing with a case regarding Facebook. You are fined. You face legal action for posts on Facebook. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Where does that stand right now?
Yeah. Every day, our daily work is how to struggle with our members. We writing about our rights, members' rights in the grassroots level, and that's about campaigning, education, and everything. And then government usually didn't like it. And then usually when I write protests about policy of government from the courts, the policy is we cannot use our own constitutions. It is strange how democratic decision in the Congress can deny, forbid by government to use. And then I write, criticize, and I say that only drunken professor who uh, said about that, who decide that, because it is our democracy, it is our rights. And then government feel that it is one people give reports about it, and then to the courts, to the police, and then courts finally decide that I'm guilty because defaming
Right.
peoples, and
Oh,
then
yeah.
against government rules, and then they put sanctions for me 1 year in jail.
So that's what you face right now.
Yes,
How are you fighting back? How are you trying to resist this? Are you appealing it, or what are
yes,
you doing?
yes. Nowadays I still appealing because they punish 1 year in jail, and then I get sanctioned 100 million rupiah sanctions
Mhm.
paying to the governments. And then it is the process of appealing. That's why I am still free.
Okay. All right. Let's move on now to Baker Kundakji. Baker, you are a youth coordinator for the ITF, the International Transport Federation.
Correct.
And I watched some interesting videos online about how you are making the argument that there more has to be done to reach out, that you plan to reach out to youth,
Yes.
to mobilize them. This is
Mm.
part of the democratic aspect that we're talking on this panel.
Yeah.
How are you able to reach out to youth and keep the base at the same time? Because I think you have to talk to them differently, don't you?
Yes. Thanks, Chris. Well, for us in the ITF, when it comes to young workers, it's basically they are facing all the threats that Phil was talking about. And if you look at the numbers, 77% of working youth are informal jobs and precarious jobs. So, what this means for us when we're talking about precarious jobs, the gig economy, we have a very specific focus on the gig economy and how we try to organize
Mhm.
platform workers. This has been one of our strategies that we're taking forward after our recent Congress. And to give you an example, is that we have been working with delivery riders
Mm.
across several countries in Europe and mainly in Australia as well. These workers are moving all the time. So, how do we try to organize them?
Yeah.
We need to change the way we used to organize before. We need to use these digital tools for them as an opportunity, not just a threat, so that we can bring them in. And of course, we have to work at the same time with policy and regulation
Mm.
in parallel, because our unions, us as an international organization, we have to work on national level, on international level, to push policy and change the regulations and do our research, of course, and at the same time create our own digital organizing strategies for these young workers to come in and to keep them and to empower them within the unions.
What's the argument that you make, and what kind of wording, what kind of semantics do you use? Do you say, do youth want to be called workers? Or they just, what are they called?
Well, I think it's there is an argument about whether they want to call themselves as workers or not. But at the end of the day, I think because of all the threats that they have been facing, or all the violations that they have been through in these kind of precarious jobs, they would come back and see themselves as workers.
Okay.
So
So
again,
you maintain that kind of
yes,
reach
yes,
out,
we
outreach.
reach them as workers that we want to organize.
What about the argument that millennials, they don't want to belong to any group, they don't want any sort of they don't want structure, they want freedom, they don't want to be chained to a desk for 35 years? How do you respond to that?
It's there and it exists. We have a live example in the UK with these kind of I would say group of young workers again, but they have been organizing themselves in the same way that I just mentioned, using the digital tools to be able to reach each other and protect their rights. At the end of the day, this is what we want, is to see these companies get or guarantee those workers their rights.
Okay. Is there anybody out in the audience, or do we have any? Let's see. Is there anybody online who gave a question? Hashtag ITUC 18. Diana, you're not here at the moment. Okay.
Yeah. I'd say that.
But go ahead, Phil.
Young workers aren't asleep. If you look at the action that we've seen in the US last year, the union membership grew net by almost 300,000. The majority of those were under the age of 35. If you look at the action that's taking place with Unite Here, with respect to organizing in hotel chains, if you look at the 15 for 15 campaign, if you look at that broader social movement, the Me Too movement, there are a lot of young people who are active and taking things into their own hands.
There's a recognition that there is a strength in numbers.
There's a recognition of being stronger together, and there's a recognition that when they see how the world has treated them,
Yes.
they don't like it. And when they see the power of business and the power of manipulation, how many young people have actually come off Facebook since the Cambridge Analytica story was ripped? I mean, we're talking about millions. It may only be a drop in the ocean of the 2 billion followers of Facebook, but there's a kind of a new awareness out there that because Mark Zuckerberg says it's so, it ain't so. So I think there is this awakening about climate. There's awakening about unfairness. There's an awakening about avenues being closed to their own futures. So I think when you look at the Pew study on millennials, there's more awareness and social consciousness in the latest polling results than we've seen for a generation.
Okay, let me go to Edward now and switch gears a little bit, because it's interesting. I want to point out that your organization, the KSBSI, has trained people. Tell me if this is right, because this is what I found out. Is you have trained people to try to integrate decent work and respect for the climate change, so trying to fight climate change, into labor agreements.
Yeah.
How does that work for you?
Yeah, we educate our members because we have in Indonesia not in the national level collective agreements.
Yes.
That's why we goes to the plants level. We invite representative. We educate them how to include the climate issue.
Yeah. In your
in the
collective bargaining
agreements.
Yeah.
And then we today after training we make audits how much impact of the bargaining. We some we put on the OHH, occupational health and safety content. Some of issue we put on the specific issue, just like water, sanitary, and then electricity using, because we negotiate to the employer that climate is also gain from them, not only for us, because sometimes like how they example when they go out from the factory, they put off electricity and everything. It is some of issue example.
Now, in this, there must also be the question of just transition.
Yes,
correct.
Just transition.
That must be part of it.
Yes, yeah.
How do you work that in?
Yeah, we work. We train them. We asking expert also to say, and then to analyze what's the contents in the company level, which we can input in our bargaining negotiations.
Okay. Now let me go back to Phil. What we're going to see in January.
Yeah.
Phil, I mean, how much of a change the rules aspect can we see? How much will it suggest changing the rules? That's one of the themes here during this week.
I think the whole thrust of the conversations that we have had have been about recognizing that where the world workforce finds itself today is basically not acceptable. That where the world's workforce finds itself today is objectionable, it is not sustainable, and therefore the rules which govern the workplace and labor relations and the business community have to change.
And quite often they're not the rules. It's been deregulation. It's,
Yeah,
it's the law
well,
of the jungle that you want to bring
we're
some
beginning
kind of rules to this situation.
Indeed, because what we have seen is market failure. We've seen market failure in terms of climate degradation.
Right.
We've seen market failure in terms of income distribution. We've seen market failure in terms of financial collapse, which costs millions of jobs. And we've seen a continuation of that neoliberal kind of Washington consensus model and all the conclusions that you draw that the social balance sheet of all of this and the condition and quality of life for working people has actually got worse. Our economies are more vulnerable. They are more unsustainable. Richard Attenborough said we're facing the end of civilization as we know it.
That was interesting.
And therefore, this notion of not accepting business as usual, the message will be that things have to change and that we need to develop a sense of a reinvigorated social contract and that we need to be bold in putting out this new vision of the world to people. A clear message to the world of business about changing their business model away from short-termism, away from the shareholder value model, away from a sense that they're in it just for the shareholders and that there are other stakeholders concerned. A message to the financial industry that even though the current political waves are again anti-regulation, that those rules of the game have to change. And above all, where things have to change is as we've heard from Baker and the great work of the ITF, is that the business model, the rules have to change. Just because Uber says it has to be like this doesn't mean it has to be like this. And I think we had this financial crisis, millions of people thrown out of work. So the message was, any work will do. If you got a job, if you got a few pennies coming in, that's fine. Be grateful. And I think this platform economy saw this and said, we see a chance. I think ministers of Labour were taken on the back foot. But now we begin to see the consequences. And what all this have done is to underline that at the key to all of this, there is an employment relationship which is at the heart of the model. And that we have to reaffirm that. And we will also be saying that we need these basic labour standards, those rules in terms of rights and in terms of conditions need to apply to every single worker wherever they are in whatever circumstance they find themselves in. We can only do this by changing the rules and also to ensure that the rules of union organisation and collective bargaining are also respected. Those rules are known. They have to be respected and applied and enforced.
Is there any questions out there? We got about 5 minutes left for the next panel, so this is going by very, very fast. Baker, what would you like to see in this ILO report next month that would appeal to youth, that would improve democracy among people who work?
Well, it's basically, I think, everything that Phil has touched upon right now. And we have been working very closely with the ITUC as well, the youth department of the ITUC, to try and have a relationship with the ILO and have a say on what the reports are coming out to be. Yeah. And I think it's very important for the youth to feel, let's say, safe or reassured that these conditions, that they will have their working conditions respected, let's say. They will not.
That's a generality. Can you give me more specific? What would appeal to you?
We're looking at decent jobs. Okay. That's what they want. They want decent jobs, decent wages. They want to be able to have their sick leaves when they are sick. Yeah. They want to be able to be paid when they are ending, let's say, for example, they're terminating or ending their employment. Another example that I can think of was, again, going back to the platform and delivery workers, is that they are considered, the employer would like to consider them as self-employed.
Thank you.
Until a very recent case, one of the courts in Australia was able to rule that this driver is actually an employee and therefore he has rights. He cannot just be thrown out. Right. So these are the kind of guarantees that we want to look for the young workers, because these are, as Phil mentioned, these are the jobs that they have, the available jobs that they can find these days because of the very high unemployment in almost everywhere in the world. So when
Right.
they find these kind of precarious jobs, they want to see guarantees that they can have the minimum conditions.
I have a question here, sir.
Thank you very much.
Could you give your name and title, please?
My name is Michael Sikani from South Africa.
Okay.
Um,
Which organization are you with? Or
I'm with COSATU, Congress of Trade
COSATU,
Unions
okay.
of South Africa.
Yeah.
When we talk of the change of rules, especially now that the panel is here, you basically link this to the fact that France is on fire. As
that
a
might be a
result,
little exaggeration, but okay. All
as
right.
a result of social benefits that are downgraded over time by capitalism. So when we talk of change of rules, to what extent do trade unions of today gear up themselves for that particular fight, and also equipping both aged and young members to be able to fight for their rights, understandingly as to when you change the rules, you also have to change the society?
Good question. Very good question. Edward, please.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
In our unions, we put women and youths on the executive board committee. We want to make sure that their voice heard in our unions. We must change our rules, not be like old unions structures. And then so we use also the technology, how to campaigns, how to attract peoples. And then almost, I think until now we are in the region have all. Indonesia is the biggest, one of biggest country who use new technology of Facebook. We are also biggest WhatsApp. We use this media to campaigns to hear their voice. So we are become uh, in their life. If not, they will leave us because we are not uh, even uh, in their positions. I think it is our way to attract new generation, and then to attract issue, and also about new future of work, new the technology using environment, green economy, and then we use these campaigns, we use these tools to campaigns all the our needs for future of work.
Okay. Baker, couple final thoughts
I think
and answering.
I just want to add regarding the youth bit, I think it's all about relevance to them. They need their space as well, because we've heard for a long, long time that youth are important or young workers are important to build union power. But this was more of just statements made. The young workers or the young workforce right now wants to be part of the union structures, not terms of leadership. I mean, being part of the movement. And I think this is how we can build our strength in our unions, and this is part of our strategy. We have here one of our affiliates in Uganda, for example, who have worked on organizing hundreds of thousands of informal workers using digital tools and technology by looking at ways of making it interesting, reaching to them on their issues on a wide range. So this is how we should bring them in and keep them, not just it's good to publicize unions and the successes and the strength of unions, but we also need to think about the women and the young workers within this movement.
Phil, quick final thought.
Michael, the world is on edge. The African worker is on edge. The Asian and Pacific worker is on the edge. Latin America, we thought those dark forces of dictatorship and those fascist forces had been confined to history. Look at the divisions in the United States of America. You talk about the people of France. There are many people in Europe that feel exactly the same. We are on the edge. And we look at the moment when the ILO was created in 1919, when 22 million men and women had lost their lives, when the ILO was recreated and relaunched in 1944 at the end of a war triggered by fascism populism, and war. We find ourselves having to look back to those moments in history to inform ourselves today. The world is on the edge. Why? Because we've seen market failure. And because when a worker looks at the world, he just says, why is it that my child will be worse off than me? Why is it that my voice is not being heard by those political forces? That's why we say the future of work is an opportunity to the labor movement once again to rediscover its organizing strength and capacity and movement, to rediscover the power of collective bargaining, and to convince and argue with our political friends that we're not legacy organizations, that we have the levers and the tools and the ideas and the plans that can change this economic and political landscape. They have to make a new reassessment about the importance that we play in the realm of human rights, in the realm of universal suffrage, in the realm of making sure that people at work have some fairness in their work. That's why we have to challenge the big five. That's why we have to challenge big business and say a business model where 90% of the wealth of the United States, for example, is in the hands of 1%. If this continues, the fires will get bigger.
Phil, thank you very much. And in the context is we've got the time is ticking up until 2030. We're supposed to have decent work for everybody by 2030. That's one of the Sustainable Development Goals. And hopefully next month we see some indications of how we're going to do this from that ILO commission on which you sit yourself right now. A big hand to our panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you.